Where do you stand on this? Are you one of the rebels, or are you going with the government?
I'm going with the government. I think there's zero support in the country for continuing to spend this level of money, of taxpayers' money, on international aid, much of which doesn't seem to go in the places that we would like it to go to. And I think there needs to be much greater control about how it's spent, but also we need to consider about the proportion of money we're spending. We're spending far more than almost any other country in the world on international aid. And when I talk to my constituents, they actually think we should spend just a little bit less. We are going into huge national debt. We are cutting public services to deal with that debt. In many areas, we're short of cash ourselves, and I think that we need to balance things. Having this arbitrary 0.7 makes no sense to me. I would much prefer to allow the government to make judgments about what we spend at a given time, rather than have an endless pot of money that has to be used every financial year.
May I say, Andrew, that I think you have your finger on the pulse when it comes to the population of this country. This country is going through terrible economic straits right now, obviously. A lot of people are suffering. And when they look at Britain spending 15 billion pounds a year, to literally one of the projects is to help some Chinese people learn how to grow rice. I'm not even joking. Why are we giving money to India when it has its own space program? So people look at this and they think, well, surely, as much as we'd like to be generous to the poverty-stricken and the underprivileged around the world to help them out when we can, this is not the time. We should be spending more on our own country. So £4 billion off the foreign aid budget, I think, would get a lot of support from the people. And yet there are more than 30 Tory rebels, including Theresa May, who joined yesterday, I do believe, saying, oh, no, we must carry on with this. And the reasons they come up with, I think, are tenuous and torturous and, just not plausible. They say things like, oh, well, if we don't look after poor countries, they could become breeding grounds for terrorism. I mean, that's a very tenuous thing to say. They also say, oh, it's about Britain's standing in the international community. I mean, I don't want to be cynical about this, but I just think they're all from the Live Aid generation, and they went to Wembley back in 1984, and they've never got out of the sort of Bob Geldof frame of mind we've got to give to the Ethiopians. Do you see what I'm saying?
Look, I totally agree with what you've just said. I really don't think that those Conservatives who are rebelling this week are in touch with what the British people think. The British people are very generous. I mean, we are one of the most generous countries in the world in terms of international aid. We do more for promoting democracy and human rights around the world than almost any other country. We put this colossal sum of money into the international aid budget, which helps countries around the world, and that's a good thing. I mean, I do like the fact that Britain has a proud reputation when it comes to these things. But we have to also think of our own issues. And, we've just gone through the worst situation we've gone through in our lifetimes, which is double the type of downturn that we had in the type of... Sorry, there's a bit of feedback, I think, on the line.
Yeah, I'm hearing that myself, but we'll press on. I think it'll work.
Yeah, right. So, when you look at the crash of what happened in the last decade, this is twice. We're facing twice that with the downturn over the pandemic. So, we are going to go into a very deep recession. Okay, in the short term, we're going to go up again, but in the long term, we're going to have economic issues that we need to deal with. So whilst we should play our part in the world, why should we pay so much more than other countries? Why should other countries like France and Germany and America spend far less than we are on international aid? So this whole thing about 0.7, I'm afraid I disagree with it fundamentally. This is a David Cameron idea, which I'm afraid has gone very badly wrong. What we need is governments to make decisions about what we spend as and when, depending on the priorities at the time. What we don't want is a pot of money which has to be spent at the end of each financial year, regardless. So we finish up, I think, squandering money on projects, just to use up the money. And I think that is completely wrong. What we need to do is for a government to make decisions as we progress, not to have this arbitrary figure, which at the end of the day is a colossal sum of money, which is not our money, it's not the government's money, it's the British taxpayers' money. And I think we have a duty to spend that wisely and not to squander it.
And I would say, much as I respect many of the MPs, the rebel MPs, as politicians, I think that this is one of those issues, foreign aid, where a lot of politicians rather imperiously decide, sanctimoniously decide that you can't trust this sort of issue to the public, and it's up to the parliamentarians to decide this. So we're talking here, Andrew, about the possibility that if we cut back our foreign aid by £4 billion, it's going to mean millions of pounds less being spent on supporting girls' education abroad, reproductive health, clean water, HIV/AIDS, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and Syria, and hundreds of other projects. I mean, all very sad. But I think the majority of people in this country right now would say, look, in better times we can look after these issues abroad. But right now we've got to look after ourselves. I think it's almost obscene that we're spending. I mean, we are literally sending quite a lot of money to China on a project which is helping the Chinese learn how to grow rice. That is true. I mean, this is nonsense, isn't it? As I say, yeah. We're sending money to India. It's got its own space program. Surely charity begins at home. It's time to look after this nation and not foreign nations.
Well, I agree entirely, and I can tell you now that there's barely a constituent except the Labour Party, perhaps, who would have a different view. There's not a single member of my local party, from what I know, would support this policy. This 0.7, I think, is absolutely the wrong way to go. Ring-fencing a proportion of our national finances for this area is completely wrong. Government should be able to make decisions as and when. Now, there are times when we should be spending money. There are national and international disasters. There's pandemics. We did a lot of work in terms of getting rid of the Ebola crisis in Africa. When there are crises, we need to spend money. Where there's poverty, we should play our part. We've always done that, and I'm proud of Britain's heritage in playing our part in all of this. But to spend that kind of money, and this is a colossal sum of money every year, in an arbitrary way, I think those days are gone. And I honestly don't think the public are supportive of this. So I do urge my colleagues, and I have great respect for Andrew Mitchell. He was a superb
absolutely.
They're good people. Theresa May, I admire them very much, but really they're out of touch with what the British people are thinking. And I think that we need to get back to, as you said, charity at home. Let's do our bit where we can. Let's be generous as much as we can. But at the same time, let's be prudent about our own finances and our own economic situation, which is not going to be good in the coming years. We need to start looking after our own affairs while still playing our part, but we can actually do both. But we need the government to have the power to do that. If you have this arbitrary 0.7, the government has lost any control. They have to spend the money regardless. So if they want to spend more money on the schools or the hospitals or whatever it may be, they can't, because the money has to go by law on the 0.7. So to me, this is a nonsense policy.
I think I'm inferred that you kind of agree with me that the excuses these MPs come up with for not cutting the budget, I mean, they seem vague, tenuous, and kind of almost strange. In the last result, so it's all about our standing in the international community and not allowing terrorism to breed in poverty-stricken countries. It's very tenuous stuff. And then, of course, the last reason, which you can be quite cynical about, really, they say, well, it was in the Tory party manifesto for the election. We have to stay true to that. Well, it may well have been in the manifesto, but if Boris and yourself and the Tory gang had made a big thing about that, if they'd have made that their big banner headline, vote for us, we'll spend a hell of a lot of money abroad on foreign aid, you wouldn't have got elected.
Well, obviously, I fought the last election, and I was elected with the biggest Conservative vote I've ever had in my constituency. And let me tell you now, it wasn't about international aid.
I know.
I tell you what got me elected. It was because we said we would get Brexit done. That's why people in Romford voted so overwhelmingly by the biggest proportion ever in the history of the constituency, actually, for a Conservative MP, because I pledged to vote to get Brexit done. That's why they voted Conservative. It was nothing to do with international aid. In fact, our pledge to continually spending this 0.7 was actually a vote loser. That was one thing that people said to me they didn't agree with.
Yeah.
That, yes, let's play our part, but let's not ring fence, because that effectively means we spend money we can't afford. So I just really don't understand why some of my colleagues are taking us down this route. It is totally against what the Red Wall constituents would support.
Yeah.
From what I can
Good
see,
point.
I think it's totally counterproductive. I mean, it might go down well in Hampstead and Islington, but these guys, they vote Liberal and Green and Labour and goodness knows what else, but they are happy to do that because they're wealthy enough to do it. You come to my council estates in Romford and you tell them that they're paying huge sums of money to, as you said, to teach people how to grow rice in China. That's not going to be acceptable to them, because they see money that's needed for policing in our local area, for schools, for our local hospitals. That's what they see as their priority, and I'm going to stand by them. I'm not going to vote to spend more and more in international aid when in actual fact we should be putting our own interests first.
Well, all I can say, Andrew, is I hope that you and your colleagues who see sense on this issue win the day, but it's going to be a tight vote, so we'll await that vote in Parliament with great interest. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Andrew. Andrew Rosindell, a Conservative MP for Romford. There, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk Radio.